On this week's podcast, we're joined by a U.S. representative who talks a little bit about President Trump, a little bit about what it will take for Trump to win re-election in 2020, and about how it is in Washington to work with some interesting Democrats. I'm your host, Jared Dyson, and this is the Closet Conservative Podcast. So we're excited to have a special guest with us in the studio this week. You may have heard his name. You've heard a little bit about him. Obviously, President Trump talked about him a little bit recently, talking about his name and how it was a great name for U.S. politics. We're joined in the studio by Representative Patrick McHenry. Patrick, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Jared.
We'll talk a little bit about your representative from North Carolina, District 10. You've been the representative for quite some time. Ranking member on the House Committee on Financial Services. A lot of people don't really know a lot about that committee. We've had a lot of discussion around some of our friends and family after we were able to get a date set for the podcast interview to talk about that. But to put it in perspective, you have jurisdiction over banks, economic stabilization, insurance, international finance, monetary organizations. It's a lot that's encompassed as part of that committee. How did you come to that position and your interest in that?
Well, look, I mean, small businesses depend on a little bit of bank lending, financial products. Families depend on it too, and just getting a mortgage or how you use a credit card in order to start a small business, how you get investment. All those things impact the real economy, and so that's why I got into financial services, and seeing how my dad, who started a small business in our backyard mowing grass, how important a bank was to his ability to grow that business into something bigger. And look, that element of change and technology innovation isn't about Silicon Valley. It's about the rest of us, about the rest of the country, and our economic opportunity is also largely connected with our ability to get a little risk financing in order to do what we want. I mean, it takes smart risk taking. And so that's how I got into it. Then I see the huge opportunities out of technology to make these things cheaper and more affordable so that we can actually get more access to credit in a cheaper way, and that we have more options in the marketplace. So I think there's huge opportunity around this, and it's not just boring financial service stuff. It can be exciting, interesting stuff in its best sense, but also largely boring to most people.
Well, we appreciate you listing all your accomplishments there on the Financial Services Committee, but it's not without some of its challenges. The committee is made up with some rather polarizing figures on it. You've alluded to that in the past, but how is it that you've been able to accomplish these goals that you've set forth with so many polarizing distractions?
Well, look, I would say this, that I'm the ranking Republican, I'm the lead Republican on the committee, and the lead Democrat on the committee is the chairwoman, Maxine Waters. And I don't have to tell you that Maxine and I don't agree on a bunch of big issues, her view of the president versus my view of the president. And so we don't spend time talking about the things that divide us. She spends time talking with me, and I spend time talking with her on the things where we can actually get some compromise. And look, I see these new members of the committee on the Republican side, sharp, really smart, incredible people, good, conservative, thoughtful people that want to move good policy and help grow our economy. And then I see on the liberal side of the aisle, 3 of the 4 members of the so-called squad, and their focus on media attention rather than policy is really indicative of where the Democrat Party is right now. And what I see among Democrat members of the committee is their absolute obsession with the man of Donald Trump. Everything he does, everything he says, every utterance, and this is what they spend their time thinking about and worrying about. Well, I try to actually move solid policy. I'm obviously supportive of the president, absolutely, but I'm trying to get good policy through this really tough process, because that's what the American people want. That's what our economy needs, and so I'm not going to get sidelined by people's views otherwise. I'm going to work with them as best I can and try to find consensus as best I can. That's the way the process is supposed to work.
Obviously, the economy is good. It's probably the best it's been in quite some time. The president alludes to that on a daily basis. The Federal Reserve has had some increases in the rate over the past couple of years due to the economy being strong. That is a big change from the Obama administration. But President Trump has spoken out against the Fed increasing this rate. How do you see that? And should it be increased, or should the rate be cut to zero, as President Trump has suggested?
Well, look, we created the Federal Reserve. The Congress, through legislation, created the Federal Reserve and gave them power over monetary policy. And monetary policy, or basically the amount of money that's available, and what backs that money, is a decision by governments. And the question of whether or not the populace wants to use it is a different question. But in this country, we've figured this fine balance out over the last century on how to do this and have money that is of great value, not just here domestically, but across the globe. And so the independence of the Federal Reserve in making monetary policy, setting how much money is available in the marketplace, and the interest rate policy, I think is really important that it's independent of our day-to-day, week-to-week, every 2-year election process. That doesn't mean I don't disagree with some of the decisions of the Fed, but I think they need to be able to make independent decisions. Now, there's a lot of attention because the President Trump has spoken his mind about what the Federal Reserve has done. And I will tell you that is what every president has done privately for the last century. We know it from papers, from presidents, from FDR and his complaints about the Federal Reserve, all the way through to President Trump tweeting about it. Now, what does President Trump do that's different from other presidents? He shares what other presidents have said privately, he'll share publicly. And that's who he is. And that is what is so endearing to most of us about his process, right? And so he said publicly what other presidents have said privately about the Federal Reserve and Federal Reserve policies. Now, I also see that the president has a read on the economy that is really sharp. And he sees how average people live, even though he's never lived an average person's life. And that perception is missing from a lot of people in Washington. And when he says we shouldn't be contracting the money supply, we shouldn't be raising interest rates because, the global economy is not as strong as it should be or could be, I think there's some validity to that. Now, I also think the Federal Reserve needs to see clearly in that data and also that feel of the economy, something that the president has stated, which is we want people to be more prosperous, and we want people to have rising incomes, and we see that happening. But there are all these sort of risk signs with Europe, and Europe is their economy is much slower than ours. The risks of Brexit, right? Not for the long term for Great Britain. I think Great Britain's going to be in a very strong position long term post-Brexit. But in the short term, choppy waters. And now, with the impacts of trade, the trade war with China, their economy was slowing. They were deeply affected by the trade war, and that's why they came back to the table to negotiate this Phase 1 agreement. But that also slowed the economy a little bit, and the president saw that. He felt it. He understood it. And now with this risk of coronavirus on the Chinese economy and that spillover effect to other economies, I think there's some sensitivity to it. So I think the president has a unique perspective that is different than other politicians in Washington. And I think that gives him this great power to communicate and connect with people. But in this circumstance, the Federal Reserve needs to do a better job of having that feel that the president instinctively has.
I think it's a good point. I mean, it definitely is a different perspective, a different time looking with President Trump. I mean, it's we've never had access to a president like this. We've never had a transparent president in the history of our country, I don't think, to the point that he is.
No president has shared the way that this president does, that's for sure, or used social media in such a direct way, right? He's communicating directly. Now, you could say that this has been done in different forms. Reagan brought in the local press and talked to the local press and communicated directly through the television in an incredible way. John F. Kennedy, through his televised press conferences, did something no previous president had done, Very different. FDR used the radio, fireside chat, right? And look, and we're on basically a modern fireside chat right now in a podcast. But you think about the way people have changed how they consume. No, he's speaking directly. And when he has a social media post, he's approved it. And he's written almost all of them. And I know that because just listen to him, right? Say it out loud and do your best Trump impersonation and you'll nail it, right? And it's real. Everybody knows that that's what, these guys are thinking or gals are thinking, but just cut through it, right? Stop with this, phony baloney stuff, this repackaged, garbled stuff, and just communicate. And he does it in an incredible way. And, when the teleprompter stops, that's when it's going to get interesting and fun.
Well, and I think that's the reason that so many people are frustrated with him on the left. He is transparent, he is honest, and we've not seen that. It's been quite some time. The access, we hear about presidents like Barack Obama that said we're giving great access, we're being transparent, but we really didn't see that. With the realm of social media and with President Trump, we have just unprecedented access to the White House that we've never seen before. I know we're getting close to our time. 2020 election is going to be a big deal for a lot of people, and I know you're up for re-election yourself, and so is Trump. So as we wrap up, what do you think are the keys for Republicans going into November for people like yourself and for President Trump specifically?
Economic prosperity, national security. This president has been aggressive with our enemies. He has been aggressive in outreach to say, if you're willing to work with us, we'll work with you, even among people that are absolutely horrible dictators like Kim Jong-un. And he's willing to reach out and talk to them, not because he wants something for himself. He wants us to have a more secure country and a more secure globe. And so if you look at his progress with national security, he's engaged with people that are absolutely horrible, that are seeking to do us harm. And on the other side of the equation, he's been willing to take out horrible actors that do us harm. So national security, I think, is a key component. Economic prosperity. I think we're going to have a little hiccup here with the coronavirus that is going to slow down the Chinese economy and other economies. I think that will be temporary in nature, and then we'll get back to the fundamentals of this economy, and we'll see real growth. And so economic prosperity, national security are hallmarks of this president's time in office. We are far better off than we were 4 years ago, and that's why the president's going to be reelected.
Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast this week. We really appreciate it. Hopefully you'll come back and join us again sometime soon.
Hey, look forward to it. Appreciate it.
This is the Closet Conservative Podcast. All material copyright The Closet Conservative. Music courtesy of Greg Shields Music. Remember to subscribe to our podcast to receive all the latest episodes. We can also be found online at closetconservative.net or on Facebook and Twitter.